Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night up in Australia, I think. I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. I acknowledge with respect and gratitude that the University of Guelph resides on the ancestral lands of the Atawaran people and the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. I recognize the significance of the Dish with One Spoon Covenant to this land and offer respect to our Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Métis neighbors. On behalf of the GRLI Guardians, it is my pleasure to warmly welcome all our partners and associates and the many GRLI friends joining us today. I am Romina Dalla, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Guelph's Gordon S. Lang School of Business and Economics and the director of our new Institute for Sustainable Commerce. For those who are unfamiliar with GRLI, you may think of it as an ongoing collaborative inquiry into global responsibility. It is held by a deeply engaged global partnership of organizations and entities that help steward its work. The University of Guelph, where I am based, is one of the 25 full institutional partners that drive and govern the Globally Responsible Leadership Initiative. The GRLI Guardian Group, which I represent here, forms part of the GRLI's unique governance model, and our role is to look after the guiding principles and the ethos of GRLI's work. At today's gathering, in true GRLI fashion and in keeping with our entrepreneurial approach, we pilot a new format that we call Courageous Conversations. I will now turn over to John North to explain more and to help us kick it off. You are all warmly welcomed.
Pleasure and privilege to be joining you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Romina, for the welcome. And thank you also for paying respects to those who need to be acknowledged. So my name is John North. I'd like to add to Romina's welcome and maybe just to say a little bit about the kind of the format and the process for today before we kick off. This is obviously a pilot. We've invited two conversation starters. I'll say a little bit more about them just now. People that we believe hold deep expertise and have a deep interest in a particular relevant and pressing topic. And they're really going to be having a bit of a private conversation amongst themselves to kick us off. And that takes courage. So hence, courageous conversation. But they're not only going to have a conversation themselves. Once they've expressed their remarks and kind of shared their thoughts, we'll go into smaller groups for about 20 minutes or so where we can digest and reflect on what we've heard and maybe surface some of the new questions that has resulted as from hearing what our conversation starters have said. And then the final and third part of this three-part gathering today will be an open discussion where we'll hear back from the smaller groups, and we won't necessarily hear from everyone, but there will be an opportunity to kind of surface urgent and pressing thoughts and questions. Obviously, give our conversation starters a chance to respond, to share their thoughts on that, but also take comments from all the expertise and learning that exists within this room with its wonderful diversity. So we hope you find value in this process, but also in the content of today's Courageous Conversation. If you want to learn more about the GRLI's work and how to engage as a partner or an associate, I encourage you to contact me or to visit www.grli.org. We've invited Lars, Moratis, and Frans, Melissen to have our first Courageous Conversation. As many of you already know them, Frans and Lars hold joint chairs, the Joint Chair in Responsible Management Education, and they'll say a little bit more about that. They are with two different institutions, and so one of the things at the GRLI that we value is that people bring their whole person. So instead of giving a full introduction to them, I've asked each of them just to share in their introduction a short whole person biography and then to take the conversation. So it's my pleasure to hand over to Lars Moratis and Frans Melissen. And we're going to take around 25 minutes and then they'll suggest some questions and we'll go into the smaller group. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, John. Welcome all on behalf of me and Frans Melissen. My name is Lars, and together with Frans, as John said, I'm the Professor of Sustainability and Co-Chair in Management Education for Sustainability, which is a joint initiative this chair by Antwerp Management School and Breda University of Applied Sciences. So as John asked for a whole person introduction, actually I put some things to paper to remind me of my own whole person. So here we go with this whole person introduction. I've been working in the field of sustainability for some 2 decades now in various roles as a consultant, an entrepreneur, and always been academically involved in teaching and research. And I find that a combination, these different roles together, that really has provided me with some sort of constructive tension, you could say, which I found to be a source of creativity and novel ideas at best, and a source of friction and frustration at worst, at times at least. For me, our chair in Management Education for Sustainability, it should lead to something of, well, you could say a ripple effect, right? How modest it may turn out to be, but within the management education community, and hopefully also within GRLI community specifically. And if there's anything that I would really like our chair to lead to, then it's that it will provide an impetus for educational, organizational, and perhaps even intellectual change, encouraged by some critical reflection or profound critical reflection on what is, right, or on what we consider to be the norms in management education at the moment. And since this change should be rather profound, I hope that we can find ways to contribute to that with our chair. So in the course of the past 2 decades, my conclusion has basically been that working on sustainability is, well, more or less the only thing that I really want to professionally commit to. And also education, especially aimed at younger generations, is then the main vehicle for me to do so, because I feel we owe it to these younger generations to be really delving into this topic together and make sure we have we get to solutions that work, but also because education is you could say, an intervention strategy in the greater scheme of things, and also because it enables me to keep learning for sure. At the same time, I've come to wrestle personally with my professional engagement and identity. And well, I would basically lie when I say that it isn't taking its toll currently, also given the situation that we're in and given especially a couple of recent developments. And well, especially since a couple of months now, I have some feelings of dread, anxiety, and also at times outright despair, right? Some of the feelings are kind of taking over at the moment for, I think, obvious reasons. And I also feel at the moment that I really need to make some tough choices and take some, well, let's say, radical turns in the near future to really keep going. Also, as part of the whole personal introduction, some personal info. Since 4.5 years, I've been living in France with my wife and 3 children. In 2016, we took the decisions for what the French call a changement de vie, for several reasons, including our desire to embark on a life's adventure with our young family and to live in a natural environment. We ended up in rural France on the border of the Dordogne region, actually right in the middle of a natural park where we live in a very calm, quiet hillside environment, rich in forests and wild animals, and where we are writing currently several chapters in our life's book, you could say, together with our kids. And while we did not set out to do so, we have started a small campsite here that we operate during the period of July and August. It may sound somewhat romantic, which it is to a degree for sure, but let me just add to this that living in France comes with its own challenges. Well, in any case, our lives have really taken shape here, and we are glad that we have made the decision to move to France. And it's also very satisfying to see our kids growing up here in a totally different environment that we once set out to raise them in. We experience these moments of joy and happiness when we see our daughters of 8 and 12 years old feeling completely at home at the horse riding school, how the horses they prefer reflect their own personalities actually, and also witness the you could say symbiosis between them and the animals that they love so dearly. And I have these same feelings when I'm playing tennis with my 10-year-old son, who is now on the verge of participating in international tournaments. Great to see. And for us, the love for life and what they do, what we witness when watching our kids is nothing short of wonderful, for sure. But at the same time, I'm very, very aware of the fact that their future is being severely compromised by the way we have lived our lives over the past decades. That's for sure. And I find this notion rather unsettling and leads to feelings of restlessness at the moment and unease with me, but also as a desire to kind of reinvent myself. So this was my whole person introduction. Over to you, Frans.
Thank you, Lars. Frans Melissen, 50 years old, born and raised in a very small town in the southern part of the Netherlands, where I live now as well, by the way, despite the fact that when I was 18 and moved out, I promised myself to never return. But for some reason, about 6 years ago, it turned out to be the best decision ever to actually return. I live here with my girlfriend, the same one for 30 years, a dog, no children. I'm still the first and only one in my extended family to go to university, which makes me the odd one out in my family and also a little bit in this small town in which I live. And when I decided to go to university at 18, actually, if I would have done what I would have liked to do, I would have studied biology. But because of some weird coincidence, I found out that there were specific admission criteria for a specific study in Eindhoven University of Technology, based on your grades in high school. And given that I had high grades and didn't understand what to do with those high grades, I for some reason decided to turn them into admission for industrial engineering and management science. I'm not quite sure whether I really regret that decision, because I met my girlfriend in Eindhoven when I lived there. I've learned a lot, and everything that has happened since would have probably happened differently if I would have made a different decision then. But if I could go back, I would have probably made a different decision, which confuses me, by the way. Once I graduated from industrial engineering and management science, I didn't really know what to do. One thing I did know, I did not want to go into a company and work for a boss just to earn as much money for the boss as possible. That was not what I wanted to do. And I expressed that to the dean of our academy at the time. And his response was, okay, well, our students counselor has fallen ill, so could you start tomorrow? And that's what I did. Did that for a few years. And then I started a PhD project. And that's the first time I started looking into sustainability, because my PhD project was on the consumer electronics collection system in the Netherlands. It was sponsored by the ministry. And even though I was supposed to look into the logistics of the collection system, I soon found out that that wasn't actually the problem. It was people's behavior in relation to handing back discarded consumer electronics. So from that moment on, now 25 years ago, I started looking into the relationship between people's behavior and sustainability. And that's what I've done ever since. With ups and downs, and one of the downs was actually at the end of that PhD trajectory when I went to the ministry to hand over my dissertation to the ones that had paid for it, and then the director general of the ministry told me that he loved the color of my dissertation. It was green, it was beautiful, But there was a new minister as of a week earlier, which meant policy had changed, which also meant that the contents of my dissertation was now irrelevant because they were moving in a different direction, which was both a shock and a wake-up call at the same time. It resulted in me becoming even more sure about the fact that people's behavior was apparently the problem when it comes to sustainability. So it actually motivated me to continue working in that area. And I moved to Groningen in the Netherlands, worked at university there for a few years, and then ended up at the University of Applied Sciences in Breda, where I am right now. I've been there for 16 years already. So apparently I like it, so that's good. And I've had various positions there. Currently, I combine two positions. One is the chair together with Lars on behalf of Breda University of Applied Sciences and Antwerp Management School. I also have a second professorship in Breda, which is called Sustainable Experience Design. So that's slightly different than management education for sustainability. But the word sustainability is in both. So that means that for the last 6 or 7 years, my life is all about research and education on sustainability. In doing that, I couldn't tell you my age index. I have no clue, to be perfectly honest. I also don't care. If I'm really honest, I actually care more about my world golf rating in pixel golf, which is how I spend my free time. For those not familiar with that, that's playing golf on the PlayStation and competing with people across the world. And just to give you an idea of how big that is, the latest copy of that game sold about 2 million, and it's free this month in PlayStation Plus, which means that there's a few more million people joining us to compete. What I do care about when it comes to work is trying to have an impact. And that will return in the discussion with Lars a little later as well, because it's about impact when it comes to advancing sustainability. That's what I try to do in everything that I do. But like Lars, that also leads to questions and self-doubts about are we doing the right things, and am I actually doing what I could be doing to advance sustainability the most, or should I be doing different things? And in that light, more and more, I actually can relate to Laurel, the older sister of Dorothy in the movie Jerry Maguire. The more I think about that, the more I find out that I'm becoming incapable of small talk. So let's see whether that's actually is a positive or negative influence on a courageous conversation like we're having today. We'll see in a few minutes. But before we move back to what Lars and I both highlighted, which is doubts about where to go next, maybe it's good to remind you all of what Lars and I wrote in our paper, which was the foundation for the blog, which was the reason for inviting us today in the first place. So Lars, could you remind us of a few of those items in the blog, so to set the stage?
Yes. So it was an article that we wrote for the journal Management Learning that carried the title "Bolstering Responsible Management Education Through the Sustainable Development Goals," three perspectives. So what's important to say here as well, beyond the contents of this article, is that Frans and I have made really a conscious choice to write in a more accessible and perhaps less formal and academic style, and write critical reflections when we set out to embark on our chair. We thought it was important also to reach an audience and also to fulfill the aspirations we had when it comes to the ripple effect in the respective communities that we wanted to reach. So in the end, this article was submitted in the category of provocations to debate of this journal. And while the SDGs, they are not exempt from substantial critique, most of which we tend to share, because Frans and I are also pretty critical when it comes to the SDGs. We do think that the SDGs harbor at least much more potential for management education than the way in which they are usually used by management educators or within business school, if you will. We are not satisfied with current ways in which the SDGs are being used. We think it's usually rather in a superficial way. Also, it is frequently used as just a new label for things that are already taking place. And you see the same phenomenon, by the way, of course, in business. And sometimes we really think that they may have well become part of the problem themselves, these SDGs. And we wrote the article, as we put it, and I looked this up, as an invitation to critically reflect on the roles and contents of management education in spurring sustainable development, and to engage in a meaningful discussion about the value and limitations of the SDGs for advancing the responsible management education agenda. And in line with this ambition, we identified 3 perspectives on using the SDGs differently in management education. And the first perspective is about that the SDGs incorporate trade-offs, tensions, and paradoxes. And this should lead management educators to at least reflect on the SDGs together with their students in a way that goes really beyond the instrumental or business case approach to sustainability. And we think it gives rise to the to critical studies investigating assumptions about sustainability, about sustainable business, and also how we have been treating the topic within business schools, in our business schools. And this includes challenging our culture of consumption, debunking green growth, but also in terms of greenwashing by business. And we think it is really important to acknowledge the complexities and dilemmas that the SDGs bring with them. So this is something that goes way beyond the way in which we see a lot of business schools are using the SDGs. So that's the first perspective. Second perspective is realizing the SDGs implies engaging in systemic activism, as we called it. And it's useful to define systemic activism here for purposes of clarity in what we're talking about. So systemic activism specifically refers to a type of activism that recognizes the systemic, complex, and interconnected nature of the problems it sets out to address, and by implication then assumes that change is required on many different levels. But the SDGs themselves clearly reflect this nature of our world's most pressing problems, because many of the goals are, you could say, communicating vessels and or interdependent, and represent systemic problems that do not have single issue solutions, and they actually require a rethinking of economic, political, social, and cultural systems. And we see, Frans and I see, engaging in systemic activism as an, what we called in the article, an action-oriented manifestation of a critical approach to management education and a way to advance this responsible management education agenda. We think it's an integral responsibility for business schools, right, to engage in this systemic activism, also because business schools have a very large role, kind of a spider in the, well, in a sense, a capitalist web, if you will. And we included several examples of what we think could be good ideas from a systemic activism perspective. And one of the examples that we mentioned in the article was for business schools and try to experiment with appointing something like a climate activist in residence. So a third perspective, final perspective, is that we think that embracing the sustainable development goals comes with what we called in the article emotional effect. So as we write in the article, Agenda 2030 and the SDGs can be quite overwhelming for both management students and management educators, and the breadth and the spectrum of challenges, difficulties involved with their technical operationalization, their geographical scope, complexity, their entanglement, and the consequent dilemmas in deciding what is the desired way of action, and the lack of actual progress in realizing the agenda, or even isolated goals for that matter, may may very well trigger emotional responses in management students and educators alike. And we've seen this, right? We're experiencing this firsthand, as you may as well experience this. And just look at the recent study by Bath University on how young people in the age of 16 to 25 are really suffering in a psychological sense from thinking about what their future will look like, right? Against the background of this climate catastrophe that we are witnessing, and the, well, inability, unwillingness of institutions to really come with substantial solutions for this. And we feel it's very important. It's of the highest importance, you could say, to acknowledge the feelings of students, and, for example, just install climate corners for students to share their feelings and discuss what they are experiencing and feeling at the moment. So this is what basically the article is about. I think, I mean, we can provide you with the article to just to have a look at it, and we are very curious to learn of what you think of it. And well, Frans, perhaps it's a good moment now just to also tell some of the personal things that we experienced over the past few months, right? That are really the things that keep us awake at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, this is something that Lars and I have discussed over the last few months, because for some reason we're going through somewhat of a similar process at the same time. Not quite sure whether the outcome will be the same. We'll find out. But ever since publishing that paper, obviously we've done further research, we've done more publications, I've been teaching to students and so on, and life has just gone on, and I'm trying to incorporate these 3 items myself in studying education and doing education. And then the summer came, and a few things happened. First of all, I turned 50, so it could be that whatever happened after that is just midlife crisis. Although I still think that Lotte, that girlfriend that I've been with for 30 years, is the one. So apparently that part of the midlife crisis is moving past me. I also don't have a desire to buy a motorcycle or whatever, like something like that. So I don't think that's it. What happened is that when I was on holiday together with Lotte, I started reading this book by Richard Attenborough, A Life on Our Planet. And while reading it, obviously there's a lot of things in that book that I already knew, but the way it's been written somehow makes it sink in a little bit more than knowing it on let's say an intellectual level. Especially because I at some points I just had to share what I was reading, so I read out a few parts of the book to Lotte, my girlfriend, and in that same period, I mean, in the summertime, there's always news in Europe about some wildfires spread across Europe. That's not new, but this year there was something else. There were also floodings in Europe, in Germany, which actually cost the lives of more than 100 people. In Belgium, a few dozen people. And those floodings also reached part of the Netherlands. No lives were lost, but huge material damage, and also a huge impact on people living there in the first place, but especially in the way climate change suddenly became part of discussion on TV, on social media in the Netherlands in a different way than before, because now suddenly there was something that we could actually witness firsthand ourselves, probably for the first time in this otherwise very privileged country. And then in that same period, the latest IPCC report came out, which was also on the news and being discussed by people on TV and in social media and so on. And Lotte picked up on that, and in combination with me reading this book and me telling telling about that to her, and the news about those floodings. And then something clicked or happened to her. And as of this day, we've been talking about what's happening with our planet and with people on our planet every single day, because Lotte now can't stop thinking about that and wants to talk to me about that. And given that I apparently am in the know in her eyes, because I've spent the last 25 years researching this topic, I'm supposed to give answers. And I don't have them. A lot of the times, it comes down to me having to tell her what, if I'm really honest, I think we as humanity are that stupid that we need a few more of these disasters and even bigger ones before we are actually going to change our ways in trying to save what's left of our planet. That's my honest answer, which leads to intense discussions about our own future, very much as Lars said, about what's next. And interestingly enough, I'm coming to find that I'm not the only one that has experienced something like this over the last 6-7 months or so. When I talk to about this to some of my colleagues at the university, it appears that something has happened to more of them. And the same goes for a lot of the students that I talk to. I myself have been approached by Extinction Rebellion through Twitter a few weeks ago, who called me out and said, "Are you doing enough? Shouldn't you join us?" So I decided to have a talk with one of them to find out whether I should. I'm not sure I should, but I'm thinking about things like that. And if I then reread what we wrote at the start of this year, the biggest question that pops up for me is, this is all nice. I still think this is correct, but is it enough? And is this the big step that we need in education? And by the way, in how we operate as a society in general. And it leads to even bigger questions about, am I doing enough? Am I doing the right things? Shouldn't I just, well, I don't know, move to a nature reserve and start building fences to have the feeling that I'm actually doing something? But then that sounds like midlife crisis. So I don't know. So I get confused about that, and I also get the urge to talk about that. So that's what I've been doing with Lars for quite some time now. And Lars, while we did that, it turned out that you're going through exactly the same at the moment. So could you share a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, for sure. Well, the thing is, I'm probably too young to have a midlife crisis, but you never know, right? But what I experienced over the past few months, and I find this, I mean, this is just something that I experienced really, really unsettling. A couple of things. We had the holiday season here at the campsite, and it was, I think, mid-August, that the latest IPCC report came out, and for some reason, I was a bit surprised by what it did to me, and I really thought, I mean, I was, and I still have this feeling after August. I'm kind of disoriented. I really feel disoriented, and I've been thinking about, and I've been trying to see what I can do with these feelings. And I must say, I find it difficult. I see we're very open to our children about climate change. We usually watch the kids news that we have here in the Netherlands, where there's a lot of attention for climate change in particular. And at the same time, when I think of it, and I think what we're going through as a society, as a civilization, in fact, I always feel that I'm hesitant to really talk things through with them. And this is what I find really difficult, not only talking this through with them, but that I have this feeling or tendency to avoid talking about this future with them, and that's kind of unsettling to me. And you might have seen the research by Bath University, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago now, that was published, and I think it will be in the Lancet or something. And it was this research among young people, international, I think 10 countries or something, including countries like Portugal, but also the Philippines, Nigeria, etc. And it was also kind of shocking, actually. And just to give you, I wrote down a couple of the findings from this research, because it's serious stuff. Let's put it like that, because 75% of these young people that responded to this research believe that the future is actually frightening, right? They find the future frightening. When you look at the youth in Portugal and the Philippines, this percentage goes up to 81, respectively 92%. A second result is that climate distress and climate anxiety is significantly related to perceived government inaction and associated feelings of betrayal, right? So we have here a generation that is growing up, or multiple generations that are growing up, thinking about their own governments as betraying them, right? So going diametrically opposed to their own interests and their own well-being. And the third result, 58% of young people surveyed said governments were betraying me, right? 58%, and or future generations, 64%, said their governments are not doing enough to avoid a climate catastrophe. And I think it was news from yesterday or this morning, I can't even remember, that the national climate commitments that we have now leading up to COP26, the climate summit, they need to be 8-fold of what they currently are, right, in order just to be in line with the Paris Agreement. And just noting that the Paris Agreement only gives us a 50% chance to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. So, I mean, this really has been bothering me, especially over the past couple of months, and it surprised me also in the sense that this feeling that I now have, that also leads to my to me wrestling professionally with my professional identity. It took me still by some surprise, and we've been talking, Frans and I have been talking about this, and I mean, to a certain extent, we can analyze this, right? We can approach this from kind of an intellectual point of view. And at the same time, you have a feeling, am I doing enough? But also a feeling of what's next, right? This is kind of what the Germans would say, und jetzt, what's next? That's the question. Also, we think, because on bad days, I think that we are really approaching a future with disasters and violence, right? That is all but unthinkable. And at good days, I think, well, we should really prepare. We should brace for impact. And yeah,
Lars, and I know that John will appreciate this given the time, but so that translates into some questions that I think would be interesting for the participants to discuss in the breakout sessions. First of all, obviously, we would love to hear what you think of those 3 suggestions that we have made for management education, about addressing tensions, addressing activism, and addressing emotions. But I guess our main question relates to what Lars just said. What's next? Because ever since publishing that, based on what has happened over the last 6-7 months to Lars and me at least, but apparently to more people, the real question is, what's next? So now what? Is this enough? Or do we need to go a step further, or maybe even 2 or 3 steps further? Because discussing the tensions in the SDGs intellectually still relevant, not going to change things enough in time to avoid some of those tensions becoming reality. So what does that actually mean for the next step in education, in management education, in business schools, but also beyond? So summarizing our main question, unfortunately, John, it's not 2 or 3 small questions. It's one big question based on whether or not you recognize what we've just shared with you. Now what? What is the next step for all of us? That's the question that we would love people to address in the breakout sessions.
I think that's great, and thank you just provisionally to Frans and Lars for sharing so openly, honestly, and in such a vulnerable way. I think you stand. So I've posted your suggestions there with a link to the blog article where everyone may just kind of remind themselves of the 3 suggestions. What we're going to do is we're going to open the rooms for 20 minutes. And I'll try and check in case we need a bit more time. The rooms are going to have somewhere between 5 and 7 people per room. It's entirely random, so it's going to be a little bit difficult. If you're in a room that you don't want to be in, you have the option of coming out and moving into another room. Okay, so I'm going to open the rooms now for 20 minutes, and then when we come back, we won't necessarily do a round with feedback from every group because we won't have enough time to do that. So in your groups and individually, you may digest, reflect on these suggested questions, and when we come back, we'll keep it fairly open and hear from everyone in the room if there are any kind of urgent ideas, thoughts or questions emerging. And we'll also, of course, give Lars and Frans an opportunity to respond to those. So let's trust the process. The rooms are opening now. What we'll do for the final part of this courageous conversation is we'll basically hold a space for anyone to take the mic, and just if you do take the mic, please try and keep it brief and succinct. Maybe just say who you are in 2 sentences, and then the idea, the inquiry, or the intent that you would like to share with the group, and maybe we'll hear 2 or 3 of those and then give Frans and Lars an opportunity to respond. So this is a more dialectic kind of format, and yeah, let's follow the principle of popping when you're hot, popcorn as we call it. So whoever is ready to take the microphone, just put up your hand and we'll go ahead. And for those that need to duck, JC and Karen, wonderful to have you here. Okay.
Yeah, I could jump in really quick. My name is Dima Jamali. I'm the Dean of the College of Business at the University of Sharjah in the UAE. And I was really touched by the 3 key pillars that were shared, and I think they are spot on. I think that first on emotions, we are all frustrated with the slow progress on the SDGs. In some cases, we feel we're moving back instead of moving forward. And I think on activism, definitely we need more activism in the world. And I think on the language of the SDGs is very aspirational. It doesn't capture the complexity and the reality. So this is spot on. I'd like to conclude. I don't want to take more of your time, but this was the echo of the group as a whole. And I want to say that I'm also co-editor-in-chief for a journal entitled Business Ethics, Environment and Responsibility. And we're encouraging this sort of scholarship, reflective scholarship on the SDGs that is more reflects a different perspective, not just like the common and the popular perspectives, but more like deeper and reflective insights. So anybody wants to contribute, we have a shorter section called Heterodoxies, 6,000 words, 3,000 to 6,000 words, more reflective, more controversial, and it will help to advance the conversation. Sorry, John, I took a long time, but I wanted to say that. Sorry, thank you very much.
Thanks, Dima. Before we take the next comment, Lars and Frans, just to ensure that you both have your pens and papers handy, just to make notes of anything that you hear that we can perhaps address. Thanks. Okay. Sorry, Miriam, please go ahead.
No, so Miriam from TIA School for Business and Society in the Netherlands, where I'm working on responsible management education. So in our group, we were also inspired by your input, Lars and Frans, and also the feeling of anxiety was something that really resonated with you. In brief, we discussed the need for system change, that what we do in a business school, well, is meaningless unless, for example, the neoliberal paradigm outside of the business school changes. But we have a role in there, and we stressed well, the motto of the GRLI, the me, we, and all of us. And so the fact that we need to stress that there's a connection between what we do and the system, and share that awareness also with our students and with our colleagues in order to be able to change the system.
Thank you, Miriam. And then we're going to take one more comment from Aditya Singh at Athena. It's wonderful to see you, Aditya.
John, always a pleasure. We had a brilliant discussion in our group, and what we understood was it is all about context. It's about relevance. What may seem relevant to one group of people in a country may not seem relevant to another group of people in another country. And we were discussing that. So we had people from France, we had people from Amsterdam and Portugal, so from India, and so on and so forth. That's one thing which came out. The second part which came out was that the sense of urgency was again different in different groups of people. So for some people, it was very urgent. For others, it was this concept, which was an intangible, which may or may not happen in the future. What we also discussed was that because of the entire pandemic, which has happened and the effects are still going on, there seems to be, that a lot of the climate discussion, sustainability discussion seems to have gone on the back foot for some reason, which should not be happening. And we're hoping that that comes back given the uncertainties which are there. And the fourth, which we discussed, was that in order for this to really become a long-term growth perspective from a sustainability and circularity side, we need corporations and companies to come in and fully invest into this entire movement, which should only happen if they see profitability from an economic and commercial perspective. It should not be a social construct for companies. It should be an economic and a commercial imperative for them to come into sustainability. Those are some of the things that we came on.
I don't know whether Frans want to maybe modulate any of what you said earlier, having heard some comments, or whether we would like to continue with the round. Shall we continue with the round? How do you?
Yeah, I'm fine if you continue with the round.
Okay, great. Yeah. So let's hear some more thoughts and experiences from the small group discussion. Vana. Just gonna unmute yourself.
Hi, John. So we first tackled the third point, which is the acknowledgement of students' feelings of anxiety and stress and vulnerability, and perhaps even confusion, which has led to perhaps a nihilistic indifference. And so we were talking about how, as educators and business leaders, we can help promote number two. And activism really resonated with me personally and others in our group, that there absolutely needs to be this tighter bridge between business academy and systemic change, and perhaps even policy change. So, how can at the micro level we do this in our classrooms, and then at the macro level, is there a potential for organizations like this and others associations? I can offer ACSB, that's just fresh in my mind. That there could be, kind of a policy arm and really emphasizing change, which then could help to address the first point in the article. So, I see them all connecting beautifully. And number two, I think could help with number three. I think students need a vehicle to see, you know, their, whether it's confusion or anxiety or what have you, that they could find something tangible to control perhaps in a positive way, and to see progress. So, you know, I'm committed to doing that, you know, at the very least at the micro level, as I said. And then I think as leaders of associations, we really need to consider what we can do with government and what we can do with policy.
Tony.
Well, thank you, John. And thanks, Vana, for good wrap up of our discussions. One thing that we also discussed was that it will be important to realize the role of persuasive technologies and algorithms when it comes to all of the three topics concerning tensions, activism, and in emotions. So that when it comes to our students, we should help them understand that their behavior is guided more than we actually know or realize through persuasive technologies. Especially this is happening in social media, but in any digital media delivered messaging and information sharing. So that when the case is that these algorithms tend to make the road more narrow, so they tend to make our tensions stronger, they tend to make us take stronger standing points than we originally maybe intended, and they tend to persuade us to enforce some emotions more than we think and would maybe like, especially negative ones. This is also according to ongoing research. So this is, we think, an important topic to keep in mind also with the three topics that you proposed, Lars and Frans, in your blog and publication. Thanks.
Thanks, Solin. I think, Tony, you had your hand up.
That's better. Can you hear me, John, colleagues?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to contribute. So I'm Tony Roche. I'm CEO of Emerald Publishing. So I'm not a researcher. I'm not in a business school, but we were founded by management scholars in Bradford University back in 1967. And our whole raison d'etre is social sciences research, particularly open research. And our whole mission now is to move away from legacy metrics of academic influence towards real impact, change in society, and helping researchers to realize that change in their research and in their teaching. So, I mean, thanks to the two speakers for very provocative placement of a session, which I found almost intimidating or overwhelming in the scope of the challenges ahead of us. We were struck in our group by the feedback from young people that's been voiced through various surveys, and we talked about how we unleash their creativity and help them to feel empowered to create change, and therefore what roles business schools might take and other stakeholders in the ecosystem to help lobby and advocate and affect that change. And so we got into topics around the research that takes place, the teaching that takes place, how students can be mobilized to contribute to change on the ground to address the SDGs, as well as a more coordinated collective movement, perhaps. Is there so questions there around, is there the will to do that amongst business schools to coordinate that? Is there the opportunity to work with accrediting bodies? I think one of the other speakers has talked to this, to recognize and reward those the right behaviors and not just the traditional things that have driven the business school model and academic influence and so forth. So we see opportunities to actually make a step change here, but recognizing that it requires a high degree of mobilization and collective action, almost a movement.
Thanks, Tony. Just checking. I'm not sure, Inasi, whether you had your hand up or not, whether you were about to say something. Oh, okay. Okay, I don't see anyone. So I'm just checking. I'm not seeing anyone that's putting up their hands right now. I'm wondering whether maybe we can hear Frans and Lars just from your end. We had a question here from Farah, who said she'd like to hear your views of what next in the context of the points that have been raised. I don't know whether you saw that, but either way, you're welcome to touch on that, or maybe just in terms of what you've heard so far in terms of thoughts arising from the small group discussions.
Yeah, of course. Posing the question is, I think, way more easy than answering this question, right? What's next? That's for sure. And honestly, Frans and I have been talking a lot about this lately. And I think the honest answer here is that we don't know. And it's not that we don't have a clue. I think we do have different ideas, but honestly, really, I think we don't know. For me, and then that's a personal thing. One of the things is that I find one of the more inconvenient thoughts that I have is kind of the realization that business schools actually may be more part of the problem than they are of the solution, right? And we tend to claim to educate the leaders of the future, leaders for the future. And at the same time, just looking at my own schools that I'm affiliated with, Frans and I recently wrote something in Dutch, an article in Dutch that had kind of translated into the title, "Leaders Without a Future?" ? Right. So that's more or less where I think I am now, that I'm really questioning the role of business schools, if there is really a role for business schools in spurring sustainability. And I'm not someone who really wants to kind of discount all the efforts that are being made, but I can say for sure that I think it's not enough. And one of the things, I think it was Filippo in our group that said something that he, from his experience with some of the things he's working on, is that the actual room for change is more limited, right? Than it seems from, let's say, the outset or the outside. And for me personally, I think in several ways, and I think Frans and I are trying to do this already, but also in the sense, you could say, kind of conservative, kind of academic way, we're also trying to do this through our sort of activism to take this forward. And Carol Parks in our group said something interesting, and this is something that will stick with me forever, this kind of also as a tagline or a life lesson, is that she said, activism is the rent I pay for living on this planet, right? And that kind of at the moment sums it up for me. But I'm sure that Frans will also have some ideas about this.
Yeah, I definitely like that line, and I will remember that as well. Some of the comments made earlier, obviously, I support that. I mean, if there's going to be a movement to bring about change in business schools and management education, that movement should be led by students, not by our generation, because we have no right to lead that movement. That's the first thing that I would like to say. I'm also struggling in my mind, to merge some of the comments. The comment by the representative from TIAS, talking about getting rid of the neoliberal way of organizing our socioeconomic system, and at the same time inviting companies to contribute, but there has to be economic benefit. I have a problem merging that in my head, and maybe what it boils down to then for me is exactly what Lars said. I'm not going to claim that I know the answer, because probably it's a combination of both in some way or another. That is the most, let's say, realistic way of moving forward, even though personally I think that is not strong enough, but it's probably the most realistic way of moving forward. What I take from today is a very important lesson for myself, is that tomorrow I have a 3-hour seminar with students in a minor from all countries, from all programs in our university. That minor is called Sustainability, Social Responsibility and Professional Identity. And I've now promised myself that I will do it completely differently than I've done it last year. I'm gonna use max 1 hour to tell them what I think is useful. And I will then tell them that we'll use the rest of the seminar, the 2 hours left, to discuss whether it is useful at all. And I'm gonna let them answer that question. And I'm gonna be there to support them in trying to answer that question. And for me, that is part of the change in the way we educate students that needs to happen. I think it's time that we stop claiming that we know what is best for them, and that we should change into a role where we support them to find out what is best for them and how to accomplish that. That is one of the key lessons for me, both from today and all the thinking that I've done over the last few months. And I'm going to take that with me in how I approach education and in how I approach research about education. So that's my main takeaway so far.
Maybe just in that, thank you, Frans, and thanks, Lars. Maybe just within this interlude, maybe a good time just to a little small plug for two things that is happening. The one is within the Dean's cohort, which some of you are familiar with. There's now a pilot being developed around a shared module on global responsibility for sustainable transformation. So effectively creating a global cohort of students. There are 6 institutions that have already signed up to run this pilot in Q2, I think, of next year. And I know that there are about 20 others that are sitting on the sidelines seeing how the pilot works out. So we are moving, I think, in a direction of trying to do that. And secondly, of course, today's conversation was very much about the content of the topic and with very much a whole person approach that we appreciate. Again, you know, if you're interested more in the connection side of the GRLI, please do consider joining as an associate or a partner in the coming weeks or months, because our partner pods is really an opportunity for deepening the connections and the relationships that are needed to sustain transformative change. So we're coming up to the close of our call. I know that there's a lot more to be said. I'm going to keep the room open. I'm around. I'm going to hand over to Romina, maybe just to say some final words of thanks.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you so much, everyone. The conversations were really courageous and so open, and I think that's kind of what we need as we move forward. And I think that's one of the things that is most precious to me about GRLI, is a space where we can talk about these challenges and you know, things that preoccupy us. I just want to thank everyone for being here. I learned so much, and I really, really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this. So thank you, John, and thank you, everyone. Until the next time.
Thanks, Romina. I'll stick around if there's anyone with some thoughts on future conversations, thoughts on the process and the of today. Happy to take comments, feedback.
Thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.